Go.
I want to bring greetings from our incredible President, Joe Biden. He loves Wisconsin. He loves Wisconsin. And I know we are all deeply grateful for his lifetime of service to our nation and for all he continues to do. That's right. That's right. I'm going to tell him what you said.
We hope he was watching that. The crowd spontaneously, in an unscripted moment, erupting in a chorus that grew louder and louder of "Thank you, Joe." And while Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are injecting this much-needed dose of joy into the race, the disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted, found liable for sexual abuse and criminally convicted of 34 felony counts ex-president and his number 2 are offering something that is not that. While Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are lighting up battleground states with Beyonce playing and mega crowds in attendance, Donald Trump is hunkered down at Mar-a-Lago, off the campaign trail until Friday, reverting to his old tricks, hurling incoherent slurs and pile-ups of insults. Stuff like this, quote, Mr. Trump, in a phone call this morning to Fox and Friends, described Ms. Harris as a nasty person and her and Mr. Walz as communists. And maybe we shouldn't be surprised that Donald Trump's muscle memory is kicking in and he's reverting to his greatest hits of misogyny and divisiveness. Because in the past 24 hours, with the addition of Tim Walz to the Democratic ticket, the Earth 1, Earth 2 split screen of the choice now facing Americans is impossible to ignore. As veteran Democratic strategist, now an advisor to the Harris-Walz campaign, David Plouffe, put it this morning on Morning Joe.
Tim Walz is normal, mainstream, and happy. And J.D. Vance is weird, extreme, and angry. And I really do think, listen, policy matters a great amount. What you're going to do for the country from an issue standpoint matters a great amount. But also that visual presentation, I think, of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, as they love America. They love people. They know our better days are ahead and we can tackle these challenges. And these other two folks in Trump and Vance are the angriest ticket in American political history.
The angriest ticket in American political history. It's an incredible branding effort, and some would argue it is also the lowest energy ticket in modern history. Good luck beating this turbocharged, joyful, and refreshingly normal opponent with what you're offering. It's where we start today with Battleground States Director for the Harris-Walz campaign, Dan Cannon. Thank you so much for being here. I know a little bit from my time on campaigns that you have one of the busiest jobs, so we appreciate you taking time out to do this. I know it's usually delegated to the comm staff, so it's great to get to talk to you. Tell me the plan. It feels like right now you have not pent-up energy, you have sort of right out of the chute all this energy, you have all these people, you have more people than it seems like you have tickets for these events. How do you sustain that? How do you deploy your two very popular candidates?
It's a great question. I mean, I think the thing that I've been talking about this campaign since the beginning, Nicole, is that we're going to have 7 very close states, more states we compete in certainly, but 7 that are just true toss-ups in this election. And we've been building campaigns and an infrastructure in those states from the beginning, designed to win a close race, designed to mobilize voters, to have offices, to have a presence in community, to engage people. And that infrastructure has been built. And so when the vice president was endorsed by the president a couple weeks ago, we already had that coming weekend, 2,300 events planned in battleground states. And so when that incredible enthusiasm came over and it was huge and palpable and real, it had a place for it to go. It wasn't just a fire with newspaper. It was a fire built with some real sturdy logs to keep the flame going. And that's what we have to do, is find a place for folks to come in, to continue to engage them, to have them bring in their own friends and neighbors and other volunteers, and to create voter contact opportunities and make this a community event, something that they are a part of. That was what we did in Obama in the 08 campaign, the 12 campaign, and I think we're replicating that to a great degree right now with this campaign.
I want to talk to you about Pennsylvania, because I feel like something that people get wrong in the analysis, even the most generous analysis of the addition of Governor Wallace to the ticket, is that you would have just stationed Josh Shapiro in his home state if he'd been tapped. He, too, would have been barnstorming the country. And I wonder if you could sort of articulate how someone in your job deploys your candidate and your vice president. I mean, my understanding, and I haven't done this for 20 years, but it's like you know, the county you go into, how many people you need to reach, how many people you need to motivate, how many people you need to persuade, how many people you need to convert. Just talk about how targeted this effort will be, not just in Pennsylvania, but across those 7 states.
Sure. I mean, I'll look at Wisconsin right here. So we're in the Blue Wall today. You're in Eau Claire, a town of 71,000 people in a Republican congressional district. Western Wisconsin, it's more rural than urban, obviously. But 12,000 people are out there today to watch Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have that positive vision that David Plouffe mentioned. And it really is a joyful campaign that does get tough and have contrast where we need to and establish the stakes. But you can run a political campaign that does find joy and connection with people. But it is to your point, Nicolle, it has to be targeted. We have to go to the states that we know are on the pathway to 270. Obviously, Michigan and Wisconsin, and of course, Pennsylvania, as you mentioned, very important, but also Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona and Nevada. And within all those states, there are different issues that matter locally. And the teams we built on the ground, you know, more than 260 offices in all those states, more than 1,400 staff in all those states. There's the principal travel that you're seeing right now, which is obviously where a lot of the spotlight goes. But with all those events I mentioned earlier, with surrogates, with local validators, with just neighbors and volunteers doing voter contact, you have a presence everywhere you need to, and you can establish messages and community events that are focused and authentic to the kind of conversation happening in those communities.
The youth vote was, for my old party, sort of a mirage. It's a really real thing for your party. So the plan of exciting them and motivating it is probably 40%, and then turning them out to vote, making sure if they're going off to college, they're registered and they're able to do that, probably the other 60%. And correct me if I have any of that wrong. But this seems like explosive, really almost historic. I'm sure you're looking back at 08 for the right comparisons of excitement in a part of the vote that you can't manufacture. I mean, the youth vote is either there for you or it's really, really hard. And it is clearly there for Vice President Harris and for Governor Walz. Tell me the plan, and tell me how much attention and focus is on turning them out as voters.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great youth program here that we run on the campaign that engages folks and has throughout the campaign. But as we head into the fall, as you mentioned, Nicolle, with the college campuses coming back online, it's another great opportunity to have a shot in the arm. But the thing I'll say about young voters, and young voters are not just college kids, they're voters under 30, right, who maybe are starting a family or trying to start a family or worried about some of the key issues that are just like the issues the rest of America faces. They do care about issues. They care about climate change. They care about cost. They care about, you know, having safe communities. They care about gun violence prevention. They care about the things that this campaign believes in and talks about all the time. And to David Plouffe's point, they don't want a campaign that is denigrating America itself, denigrating the people in America, and being mean. They want a campaign they can feel a part of something. And I think we've created that with this ticket and with the momentum you're seeing. But with that youth vote and with all the other coalitions we're trying to keep together, we need all of that, because despite the enthusiasm, and it's wonderful, it's great, it's palpable, the races are still going to be very, very close. There's some political gravity in this country that we have to recognize. And so all of this, to me, is additive to our path to victory, but doesn't predict the path to victory. We have to do the hard work and continue to mobilize folks to win these tight races across all the battlegrounds.
I heard Vice President Harris describe herself as the underdog. I know that's always music to the ears of folks in your job. You have to always run as an underdog if the polls shift, even more so that people aren't complacent. What are sort of the 3 things that keep you up at night for the next 90 days?
Well, I think we have to keep growing and scaling as we have to give people a place to activate that enthusiasm, energy in this campaign and talk to folks. We know the Trump campaign will try some things. We know what they did in 2020 by refusing to accept the result of the election. We know that they will have an effort to make it harder for folks to vote. We have a very big and strong voter protection team that thinks all the time about those barriers that will get put up in front of people to deny them an opportunity to participate in this democracy. So we're prepared for that. But I think, truthfully, the biggest challenge is going to be to harness all of this and turn it into something that is targeted to the voters we need to win, to keep people focused, and to recognize that the election is going to be difficult and tough and that we're having a wonderful moment now, but we know it's going to be a difficult slog throughout. That's just how elections in America are today. But I think we've got the team that is very battle-tested. We've been battle-tested all winter, spring, summer, and heading into the fall. And I think with the plan and with the enthusiasm and with the ticket that can really resonate with America, we feel very strong about our chances.
Are you liking this contrast that is setting up really seemingly organically? I think at one of Vice President Harris's first events, it was a crowd that started chanting back at her, "We're not going back, not going back." I mean, every campaign grabs for the future, and your supporters seem to have grabbed for it with you. I mean, how much are you sort of reading your crowds and working that into the messaging?
You'd absolutely do that, and not just the crowds themselves, Nicolle, but every night we get a qualitative and a quantitative report on the millions of voter contacts we're having at the doors, so we know what people are talking about in real community, not just the rallies, but where they're talking about in the neighborhoods. And we know they care about lowering costs, and they like the efforts that we're engaging in. The Vice President said herself in Atlanta that on day one, we're tackling Big Pharma, we're tackling corporate price gouging, right? We're tackling corporate rent hikes. Those are things folks want to hear about. They also hear about Project 2025, and it concerns them. They don't want to go back to a place where Donald Trump wants to take them, and that's, I think, where that "we're not going back" chant really comes from. It's partly organic at the doors as much as it is organic in these rallies. So we do take that stuff in. I think that qualitative and anecdotal feedback and what we see in these enthusiastic moments feeds into our thinking of how we can further connect with the voters.
How big of an issue for you is the fight for reproductive rights, and specifically Governor Wallace's position? I know everyone is now going to the archives and trying to figure out when they last saw the Vice President and Governor Wallace together, and we had footage of the two of them at an abortion rights event in Minnesota shortly after Dobbs was overturned. How much is that issue interwoven into all of your outreach?
It's obviously a very big issue in our campaign and in America right now, and I think it's undeniable that in 2022 and in the off-year elections in 2023, and by the way, Nicolle, not just in blue states, but in Kentucky and Ohio and some of those Virginia legislative races this past fall, that issue propelled Democrats to the polls. It shifted independents and Republicans to vote for Democrats in those elections. It's an incredibly important issue that resonates certainly not just with women and not just with Democrats, but with Republican women, with independent men. And I think the way that Governor Wallace talks about this issue with a real personal and authentic story with his own daughter, Hope, and the challenges they had with IVF, he, I think, gives people another example of how this issue is broad and is not just about a narrow segment of the population, but really about both rights and freedoms, but healthcare more broadly. It resonates. It's been effective for him. I think it's obviously something the Vice President has talked about with great effect on the campaign trail all year. And the two of them together, I think, make an even more compelling messaging duo on that front.
Dan, I appreciate your time. Keep coming back and keep us smart and honest and focused on the right things, as you know, where the race is really being waged. So an open invitation to join us.
Thank you, Nicolle.
Thanks. Joining our conversation, reporter for Notice, a new nonprofit Washington publication, Jasmine Wright, and distinguished political scholar and professor at Princeton University, our friend Eddie Glaude, is here. Jasmine, this is a campaign firing on all cylinders, and I say that as someone who has worked on campaigns that have fired on all cylinders and campaigns that have faltered on all cylinders. It isn't always like that, right? An outside event could change that at any moment. A challenging news cycle, right? It's not a foregone conclusion that this will always be the state of this campaign. But this is not, I keep saying this because I've tried, right? This cannot be manufactured. You don't go to a candidate lab and find someone like Tim Walz and trot him out. I mean, this is so far a very well executed campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're seeing is an extended honeymoon far beyond maybe what people even inside the campaign expected to happen. This real lengthy, long-lasting momentum that's riding them at least somewhat close to the Democratic National Convention, where we know that they could even see an additional boost. So this is something that they are excited about. I think when I talk to folks within the campaign, they're trying to be clear-eyed about understanding exactly what you said, that it may not always feel like that. I think that we saw Dan really speak to that issue, but they're trying to capitalize as much as they can, both digitally, socially. Obviously, all the money that's raking in, I think $36 million has come in for the campaign since they announced Tim Walz as her running mate, trying to create these organic moments like all those video calls we saw with Black women, white men, Latino women, making sure that people feel really involved in the vice president's success. So those are all the things that they're leaning on. But of course, they recognize that harder times will come as they get closer to November. So they're trying to also prepare for that.
And I think, Eddie, that's apparent in their messaging. I mean, there's joy, and it's right adjacent to this dire warning. Here's Vice President Kamala Harris talking about warning about what Trump would do, how he would like to terminate the Constitution if he's reelected. Let me show that to you.
Someone who suggests we should terminate the Constitution of the United States should never again have a chance to stand behind the seal of the President of the United States.
It's important, I think, to lift that moment up, because this isn't just, I mean, I love all the comparisons to, Ted Lasso and Happy Warriors, but this is a campaign with an edge and a point of view.
Oh, absolutely. They're clear about the threat to our democracy. And as the campaign continues, we see that criticism is becoming all the more pointed and really directed. I think it's necessary, but it's happening within the context of the contrast, Nicolle, between infectious hope and fevered cynicism, between inspiration and aspiration, and fire and brimstone, doom, right? And so there's a sense in which you can bring that critique to bear without kind of participating within the ominous cloud that shadows our politics. One of the things that I've been loving since the campaign started is just to hear your laugh, your infectious laugh, all the stuff that you've been reporting about. Think about the stuff that you had to go through the pandemic. Think about the stuff you had to talk about from Mar-a-Lago to the civil trial to, all the things to Jan 6, all the things we've been talking about all of these years. And finally, we're actually thinking about the future of the country. So there's a pointed criticism here. That's true. And it has to happen because democracy is still under threat. But there's also this aspirational element that's actually refreshing, it seems to me.
Yeah, Nicolle.
You know what? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Eddie makes a great point, because that is why you're seeing them use the word freedom over and over again. Not because it's distinct from Biden's message of democracy, but they feel that it's optimistic. They feel that more people can connect with it and that it applies to more things, not just reproductive rights, but the people's freedoms for economic liberty, people's freedoms to be able to live their lives as they want. And so I think that notion of freedom that we've seen the vice president talk about, that we've seen now Governor Walz talk about, is connected to wanting to take a more optimistic approach to that contrast to former President Donald Trump.
And it's something that Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer did with great sort of messaging success and electoral success in 2022. And it is this language of this ticket that is for the same ideas and ideals, but it is being injected with a little bit more levity and future. Like, we have so much more to do. I love, Eddie Glad, that you said that I laugh. John Howland and I talked for an hour and a half last night for his podcast, and I said I don't think we've laughed this much about politics in about 8 years. We'll have more on all of that. I do have to sneak in a quick break. When we all come back, we'll have more on this new Democratic ticket, their big barnstorming tour of the battleground states, plus brand new reporting reveals the depths of J.D. Vance's ties to the fever swamps of the far right wing, including months of text messages exchanged with a Holocaust denier. And later in the broadcast, Republicans in Georgia may be quietly setting the stage for manufactured chaos after Election Day there, passing a measure giving local officials more control over certifying election results. That important and vital story and more when Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Introducing MSNBC Premium on Apple Podcasts. Get early access and ad-free listening to Rachel Maddow's chart-topping original podcasts, exclusive bonus content, and new episodes of The Rachel Maddow Show and Morning Show ad-free. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts.
When I was working in the Senate, I didn't realize that it's the perfect training for the job that I have now, covering government, covering politics. The complexity of it all. You learn how to explain that and how to live through that when you work in this building. Mastering the detail is crucial to being able to present anything that happens in Senate buildings like this or any of the other news centers that we have to focus on every day.
Understand, in this fight, as Tim Walz likes to point out, we are joyful warriors. Joyful warriors. Because we know that while fighting for a brighter future may be hard work is good work. Hard work is good work.
Trump likes to think of himself as this master brander, but after the MAGA hat, he has had a lot of flops, and this joyful warrior, happy warrior thing has stuck, Eddie, and it feels like everything they do fits under that umbrella, and even the sharp attacks, and they are pointed in their critiques of this ticket. They do seem to be delivering them to bigger, louder, incredibly enthusiastic crowds, and based on sort of the data-driven analytics and strategy of this campaign, it all seems very, very strategic.
Oh, absolutely. It was wonderful to hear in the first segment all about the details of the blocking and tackling, the get out the vote, the operation on the ground. It actually gives us a sense that there's a skeleton to all of this, right? That there's an infrastructure to all of this. That's great. But let me say this, though, Nicolle, and I think this is connected to what I said before the break. People desperately need this. We need this joy. Right? This is different from 2008 with Obama. This is different from 1980 with Reagan. And it is different because of what we've been through. I mean, we are carrying our dead forward. We're carrying our exhaustion, our exasperation forward. There's a sense of distrust towards government, towards politicians, and even towards each other that has animated our lives for years now. And so the idea to have a moment where you can actually exhale, and not just simply exhale, but laugh, where politics is not a site for darkness, but a site for possibility, this is actually needed. That's why it's so fragile. It seems like, how can I put it? Like the joy is, like that laughter that just comes out because you're trying not to cry. And so I think they've tapped into this in a way that's really important existentially for a country, for a culture that's in desperate need to see a brighter tomorrow, it seems to me.
I think this is exactly right. And I don't really know why we don't talk about it anymore, but the country went through this unprocessed trauma with COVID, the biggest loss of life in the shortest amount of time. Everyone knows somebody who was lost, and we've just sort of memory hold it. And the idea that on top of that was all this political trauma, a deadly insurrection, the first ever non-peaceful transfer of power, they do make it safe to be hopeful again, and they do it with their own acts of kindness. I'm going to play this because of what you just said. This is Governor Wallace. He's speaking, and he notices that someone in the crowd needs some medical attention, and he stops. Let me show this.
Look, freedom is when freedom. Oh, can we get somebody to help? Somebody's hot. Somebody's hot. Can we get somebody to help? You okay? Take care of one another on this. This is why we gather. Look, it's hot. It is hot. I'll come again. They've got folks here. We'll make sure we're okay. But I have to tell you all again, in all seriousness, to come and gather like this, to talk about our freedoms, the ability to talk about what could be good. And I have to say, this idea of caring for our neighbor and kindness and a hand up when somebody needs it, or just the sense of that people go through things and to be able to be there when they need it, that's who we are.
I mean, Jasmine, to Eddie's point, this is sort of creating a permission structure for, to hope for something better again. That feels like the thing that not just the Democrats, but a whole bunch of people have been thirsty for.
Yeah, Nicolle, it's actually really interesting because I was in bed with Vice President Harris in 2019. I traveled throughout the country with her as she sought the Democratic nomination until she dropped out. And she also talked about herself as a joyful warrior, as a happy warrior, but it just didn't resonate enough with the Democratic electorate, in part because of some othering messaging mishaps in 2019, but because I think in a large way that the country wasn't there. They weren't willing to receive it in the same way that clearly the country and the Democratic electorate is now. And so you see that messaging that wasn't necessarily successful in 2019. People maybe didn't feel like it was her most authentic self at that time, really resonating with people right now, really resonating and bringing all of these major crowds together. I mean, just at that rally in Eau Claire today, 12,000 people. I was in Philadelphia yesterday, 12,000 people, 2,000 more in an overflow. I was in Milwaukee just last week, and it was 3,000 to 4,000 people. So I think that you're right. They are really trying to at least create a permission structure for people to engage in a happier place in politics and a happier version, I think, of what people have experienced over the last few years. Certainly now, the vice president taking that on as her own mantra in a way that she did in 2019 that just maybe didn't work as well.
Well, and I mean, Eddie, it's the mantra, and then you can see where Governor Wallace fits in. I mean, his levity, his ability to sort of ad-lib a sharp one-liner and say, oh, you see what I did there? He uses this language of shrinking Trump down to size so that he can be taken on for what he presents. I think some of us, and I'll plead guilty to this, because of how horribly anti-democratic the policies are in the Project 2025 agenda, which is indecipherable from the Trump campaign and a possible Trump term. It is this, you can almost, if you had to write a soundtrack, it would be sort of the scariest music from the scariest horror movie. But he just punctures it and turns it into, brings it down to size to make it easier to sort of bite off and chew it.
Yeah, sometimes we read folksiness as a kind of naivete, but that's not true. I come from a small town as well, and, country folk are very, very clear-eyed. They're not naive about the world because they're working hard to make ends meet. They understand it. There's no nonsense, but there's joy in the midst of it. I think when we think about Governor Walz, there's an emphasis on what I like to call the coalition of the decent. Those people who are not really defined by ideology, Nicolle, they're not, one day they may sound conservative, the next day they may sound progressive, the other day they might be libertarian, whatever the shorthand is, only thing they're trying to do is to live their values. And on the other side, you have folk who take our differences and they make them into hard divisions. And those divisions obscure the actual values that we all share. And so what we saw with Governor Walz at that moment was genuine concern and care, rooted in a very basic notion that you and I know about, and that's the common good. Where has that gone? And so I think a campaign that lays out the stakes and also stands on the values, right, breaks through all of this nonsense, and it opens up our imaginations so that we can maybe think about our politics differently.
Yeah, I think all that is so true. Jasmine and Eddie, thank you so much for having this conversation with us today. Very much to be continued. Coming up for us, a book by far-right extremists that actually celebrates Joseph McCarthy and dictators around the world, gets praise from the Republican nominee for vice president. We'll bring you that reporting next.
Democracy is egalitarian, which means it's for everyone. But it also, I think, is a divinely inspired gift of our forefathers to show us that we can lead ourselves.
It's like, yeah, okay, this person believes crazy things, but I bet if you're being honest with yourself, every single person in this room believes at least something that's a little crazy, right? The most important truths often come from people who are crazy 60% of the time, but they're right 40% of the time. Believing crazy things is not the mark of whether somebody should be rejected.
If you ever wonder why he's the most unpopular vice presidential pick in history, think about the things he's explaining. He's defending the right to believe crazy things. That was GOP vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance, who is, to be generous about it, tolerant of conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists. He's even admitted to being plugged into a lot of weird right-wing opinions. Now, we have learned he wrote an endorsement blurb for a brand new book by a far-right activist who promoted the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, that baseless, bonkers theory that a child trafficking ring was being run out of a pizza place in Washington, D.C. According to new reporting in the Washington Post, messages between J.D. Vance and a right-wing conspiracy blogger reveal his gravitational and pursuit of the political fringe. They reveal a sitting United States Senator, Vance, and potential vice presidential nominee, seeking out their opinions on everything from U.S. alliances to UFOs to aid for Ukraine to his own friendships. Vance and the blogger have remained in touch, according to the reporting, for more than a year and a half, extending into the weeks before Trump picked J.D. Vance to be his running mate. From this reporting, quote, as a newly minted senator, Vance solicited Johnson's views on many topics, including UFOs, asking, quote, what is your read? The Republican Party's relationship with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, quote, what is GOP Bibi problem? And the death of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Quote, do you think Epstein actually killed himself, he asked. When Johnson suggested that the senator should work to restrict foreign ownership of U.S. housing, Vance responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Joining our coverage, NBC News correspondent Von Hilliard and conservative attorney, contributor to The Atlantic, president and executive director of the Anti-Psychopath PAC, which is like peak 2024, right? George Conway is here with us. George Conway, let's start with that. I think of you every time I see these beyond capacity crowds for Kamala Harris, and now Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. What do you imagine the Trump version of Ketchup on the Wall is when he sees these images compared to his crowds?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, we'll probably find out at 2 o'clock in the morning if we're still up monitoring Truth Social. I mean, he can't be liking this. This is his idea that crowd size matters all, and it's all about his ego from his standpoint. And now he can't fill the very same venues that Kamala Harris has been filling. One in Atlanta, the one yesterday at Temple University in Philadelphia. I mean, when you contrast the enthusiasm and the people filled to the rafters at Kamala Harris's rallies as opposed to Donald Trump's, I mean, it's quite a comparison. And I think it really just shows, I think there's just, the Harris campaign is a breath of fresh air. And I think that Professor Glaude is right, that what he just said a few minutes ago about there's going to be a coalition of the decent. There's a coalition of the decent, also a coalition of the normal. And what we're seeing from J.D. Vance is not normal and not decent.
I think that's indisputable at this point. And I want to ask you, Vaughn, about this reporting and about Mrs. Vance's effort to sort of clean this up. In the New York Times, Michelle Goldberg writes this. Vance blurbed a new book, Unhumans, by the Pizzagate Guy. The book argues that leftists don't deserve the status of human beings, that they are, as the title says, unhumans, and that they are waging a shadow war against all that is good and decent, which will end in apocalyptic slaughter if they are not stopped. In the past, communists marched in the streets waving red flags. Today, they march through HR, college campuses, and courtrooms to wage lawfare against good, honest people, J.D. Vance wrote. And this is not a position they're backing away from, which is so amazing. This is Usha Vance defending J.D. Vance's smear against childless cat owners.
I think, Nicolle...
J.D.,
absolutely, at the time and today, would never, ever, ever want to say something to hurt someone who was trying to have a family, who really, was struggling with that. I also understand there are a lot of other reasons why people may choose not to have families, and many of those reasons are very good. I think what I would say is, let's try to look at the real conversation that he's trying to have and engage with it and understand, for those of us who do have families, for the many of us who want to have families and for whom it's really hard, what can we do to make it better?
What's amazing is you walk through life and you have no idea what anyone is struggling with. You have no idea which people without children are, I guess in her words, struggling and trying, and which people have decided not to. And the divisiveness, the doubling down on the divisiveness, is as bad as the original divisive comments, Vaughn.
And I think that there's a lot of people, if I may, like Jack Posobiec, who is the Pizzagate person who was very, very fringe in 2016 when he was first elevating these wild conspiracy theories. And over the course of the last 8 years, they have been legitimized by, now here in the year of 2024, the vice presidential candidate for the Republican Party. I mean, Jack Posobiec, it was more than just Pizzagate, right? I follow a lot of his work. He has a large presence on a right-wing outlet that is in the form of a podcast, but also airs on TV. And just earlier this year, he was at CPAC. And I just want to read, folks, this was his quotes about January 6. Welcome to the end of democracy. We are here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6, but we will endeavor to get rid of it. After we burn that swamp to the ground, we will establish the new American Republic on its ashes. In our first order of business will be righteous retribution for those who betrayed America. That is Jack Posobiec, the man who J.D. Vance, the vice presidential running mate for the Republican Party, just blurbed. And actually, when you were playing that bite of J.D. Vance justifying his association with some of these individuals, it took me back to 2022, May of 2022, when I was on the campaign trail with J.D. Vance in Ohio during that Republican primary that Donald Trump backed him in. And he was campaigning at the time with Marjorie Taylor Greene, but also with Charlie Kirk. And that very week, Charlie Kirk had posted online that there was a war on white people in America. And I asked J.D. Vance at the time why, with Charlie Kirk standing there next to him, why he would associate and lift somebody up who uses that sort of rhetoric about America. And his quote to me was, by having friends, you assume that I have every single viewpoint that those people have. That's ridiculous. I'm bringing Charlie here because I think he's a great warrior for the conservative movement, and because we agree on most things. We don't agree on everything. Charlie Kirk, Jack Posobiec, these are folks I've been long familiar with, but we're very much more on the outside, the fringe. These are people who are now key allies to the Republican ticket here in the year of 2024.
Vaughn, they add no one to the Trump coalition. Why are they front and center with 90 days to go?
I think it is the base that they were relying on this point. Before Steve Bannon went to jail, right, he made the case that the Republican Party under Donald Trump had one option. Do you have a better chance with Donald Trump, knowing who he is, of winning back over those reticent conservatives or independents in the suburbs of Phoenix and Atlanta and Milwaukee? Or do you play to your base and try to juice out those numbers and play to the people across the country who are listening to Jack Posobiec and listening to Charlie Kirk? And do you try to juice those numbers? And Donald Trump, he was a little bit more subtle in tenor for 1 week during the Republican National Convention. But Donald Trump is going to be Donald Trump here. And there is a concerted decision made in the decision to have J.D. Vance on his side and the messaging that clearly they are deploying here with just 90 days left.
George Conway, I think there's something magnificently transparent with associating themselves with these extremists in public and not hiding them in the dark pockets of the internet. But I do wonder who buried the memo that all of the defeats that Trump has suffered in 2018, in 2020, and in 2022 were not because he was too appealing to swing voters. It was because he was too extreme. And all of the losing that Chris Christie talked about in his primary campaign against Donald Trump encapsulated the problem with these associations. What is the explanation for continuing to do the thing that results in the losing?
I think the explanation is that it's something of a disease. It's pathological. I mean, you have a psychopathic, authoritarian type of leader, and now all of the lines that used to not be, you couldn't cross, about saying things about race and gender and ethnicity and conspiracy theories, all of these lines have now been crossed. I mean, you have that Posobiec guy, you've got Laura Loomer being pushed by Donald Trump. You have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene in Congress. You have all of these things. There is no normality left in the Republican Party. They're driving the normals out. And as a result, they have their own distorted view of the world, and they know they're losing, which is why they're more and more desperate and becoming more and more unhinged and talking more about destroying the country than they are about actually working together with people. It's classic authoritarian fascist movement kind of thing, where they divide them, they isolate themselves, and they basically say, cultish really, and they say that basically everyone who's not in our group is evil and dangerous, and in this case, the word was subhuman.
It's really unbelievable that it's all unfolding before our eyes. So much more to get to. No one's going anywhere. We have to sneak in a very short break. We'll all be right back.
MSNBC Live Democracy 2024, Saturday, September 7th in Brooklyn, New York. Join your favorite MSNBC hosts at our premier live audience event to break down all that's at stake in this historic election. Visit msnbc.com/democracy2024 to buy your tickets today.
You've been criticized as being a little too serious, maybe angry sometimes. What makes you smile? What makes you happy?
Well, I smile at a lot of things, including bogus questions from the media, man. I mean, look, I think if you watch a full speech that I give, I actually am having a good time out here and I'm enjoying this. But look, sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. And right now, I am angry.
He was happy before he was angry. I think they call that a flip-flop in old-fashioned politics. Vaughn, has he had one good news cycle yet? Did I miss it?
Nicolle, I think I go back to the conversation that you and I had the day of the Republican National Convention when J.D. Vance was selected. And my surprise at his being selected, especially when you looked at him in contrast to Mike Pence. Mike Pence understood the assignment of being Donald Trump's running mate and vice president. And that was to not make headlines. That was to help explain away things that Donald Trump said. Instead, over the last 2 weeks, it's been Donald Trump who has largely been explaining away things that J.D. Vance has said about childless cat ladies, answering questions as to whether he and his running mate are weird or not. So really right now, over the last 2 weeks, the Ohio senator has put his running mate, the man at the top of the ticket, really more in the precarious situation. And clearly J.D. Vance is trying to do some cleanup and trying to help this ticket by going and following around the Harris-Walz ticket at these sort of media press events there with a few dozen supporters in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania.
And what is he doing there? I saw him sort of wandering around an airport and going to a police station. I mean, what is he, like, it looks weird to me, but what is in his head, what is he trying to do?
He is trying to provide counter-programming and a counter-narrative, especially to these local stations there, to the Harris-Walz message. You see thousands of people showing up for the Democratic rally, and he is not holding his own rally, but essentially his team is setting up a microphone and a podium, and he is taking, which is good, we should note, he is taking press questions, and at least allowing that in the Donald Trump counter-narrative to get out into the sphere, because his running mate, Donald Trump, has been at Mar-a-Lago at his estate for the entire week with no campaign events, and he will not be on the trail again until Friday night for an event in Bozeman, Montana, of course, notably not a battleground state.
Why?
That's a very good question, Nicolle. I think that this is a campaign that is figuring out where its message is at. I don't think that is a reason as to why Donald Trump is not on the campaign trail. But where you hear Kamala Harris and Tim Walz talking about policies, I think that this is on the counter a Republican ticket that is really flying with the new narrative by day. Last week, it was questioning the race, ethnicity of Kamala Harris. On Monday, it was calling attention to the idea that there was a Kamala crash in the stock market, which, of course, is not played out to the same effect over the last 48 hours. And so really this is a campaign that is come and gone with its Republican convention here, but is sort of waiting for the Democrats this month here, who are very much in control of the narrative and the conversation, with the introducing of not only the top of the ticket, but also a new vice presidential candidate, and now a convention 2 weeks away here. This is, I think, a decision by the Trump team as to where they're going to expend their resources, and it may be worth, at least the calculation being for now, sitting on the sidelines a little bit more until they get to September.
George Conway, right now Kamala Harris is everything that Trump wants to be. She's getting sellout crowds filled to the rafters. She has all of the attention. And I interviewed Fred Trump, Donald Trump's nephew. He said that the 9 days after she became the nominee were probably the worst days of Trump's life. Do you agree with that assessment? Do you believe this deprivation of attention is eating at him?
Yeah, no, it's a combination of the deprivation of attention, the fact that she is getting the applause and the praise that he desperately wants to have, and also from his standpoint,
Vaughn Hilliard, George Conway, amazing to talk to both of you today about all this. Thank you so much for spending time with us. After a quick break, why a new rule that gives local officials in Georgia more power over certifying or not certifying election results is setting off serious alarm bells, raising concerns that the Republicans, if they don't win, will try to overturn the election should Vice President Harris win the state. That story coming up in the next hour of Deadline White House. Don't go anywhere.
Itchy pet? With Chewy, save 20% on your first pharmacy order, so you can put an end to the itch. Get flea and tick medication delivered right to your door.
I trust Secret with these pits and everywhere else. With aluminum-free Secret whole body deodorant for 72-hour freshness.
Because it was reviewed by not just one, but hundreds of gynecologists.
And dermatologists. Plus, it's gentle.
So I can use it everywhere. Secret whole body deodorant.
At Care.com, it's easy to get a break, even if you're not on summer vacation. Join millions of families who've trusted us and find care in your area for kids, seniors, pets, and homes. All from background-checked caregivers, rated and reviewed by people like you. That's hours and hours of goofing around. Hundreds of lovely afternoons. Mile after mile of WALKs and acres of expertly cleaned floors. Go to Care.com now to find the care you need this summer.
Hi, my name is Damian Clark. If you have both Medicare and Medicaid, I have some really encouraging news that you'll definitely want to hear. Depending on the plans available in your area, you may be eligible to get extra benefits with the Humana Medicare Advantage Dual Eligible Special Needs Plan. All these plans include a Healthy Options allowance, a monthly allowance to help pay for eligible groceries, utilities, rent, and over-the-counter items. The Healthy Options allowance is loaded onto a prepaid card each month, and whatever you don't spend carries over from each month. Other benefits on these plans include free rides to and from your medical appointments, and our large networks of doctors, hospitals, and pharmacies. So call the number on your screen now and ask about a Humana Medicare Advantage Dual Eligible Special Needs Plan. Humana, a more human way to healthcare.
Why do couples choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can it keep me warm when I'm cold?
Wait, no, I'm always hot.
Sleep Number does that.
Can I make my side softer?
Can I make my side firmer? Sleep Number does that. Your ideal firmness and effortless comfort all night.
Can it help us sleep better and better?
Please.
Sleep Number does that. 9 out of 10 couples report better sleep. During our biggest sale of the year, save 50% on the Sleep Number limited edition smart bed, plus 0% interest for 24 months. Shop now at a Sleep Number store near you.
We all know that we'll eventually need a will. Eventually. How about right now? Trust and Will has taken the process of creating your will and made it easy, like while you're lounging on the couch, easy. Trust and Will is designed by attorneys, but customized by you, one question at a time. All documents are state-specific, legally valid, and start at just $199. That's not a typo. Find the plan that's right for you at trustandwill.com.
You know, the other side, Trump and his sycophants, let me tell you something. They love to talk a good game about freedom, right? They love to cloak themselves in the blanket of freedom all the time. They love to talk a good game. But hear me on this. It sure as hell isn't freedom to say you can go vote, but he's going to pick the winner. That is not freedom.
That was from last night's opening act for the Harris-Walz announcement speech. That was the mega talented Josh